So welcome everyone. Happy that you all joined us for our immersive series session with Toby. I will just tell you a couple of words about Toby before I kind of give the word to him. So Toby Newman is a learning and development consultant with over 25 years experience in the industry, and he's also a founder of the 𝗖𝗧𝗥𝗟 awareness model. His work focuses on self-awareness, learning mindset, psychological safety, and the human side of development. He's also currently building 𝗖𝗧𝗥𝗟 as a practical awareness diagnostic for individuals, coaches, and teams. He's helping people explore the gap between self-perception, behavior, and impact. And that's why we are here to listen about it. And now, Toby, the stage is yours.
Wow, that's a hell of an intro. Because I've got like a I'd say mild imposter syndrome. I suppose it's really, it depends who you ask, really. So when people kind of like, you've done all this, I'm like, no, you just fake it till you make it and stuff. But yes, I've spent most of my time in corporate worlds, and I got the opportunity to develop something that I'm kind of very passionate about, and I think that has been underutilized and underspoken about for a long time. So, but yeah, thank you for having me for this. Now, I talk about, it's called Mind the Gap because for me, the definition of self-awareness is about the gap, but I'll come into that in a second. So very quickly, the question for you all: when was the last time that you remember, or at least looking back now, you realized you were on autopilot? I remember, when I was learning to drive, you remember everything. You remember kind of everything that's going on. But, I've been on 3, 4, 5 hour journeys and not remember a single thing until you remember maybe the arguments and the pit stops. But that's about it. But yeah, we all do autopilot in some way, shape, or form, and we kind of have to. That's kind of human nature. Like I said, when it's driving, if we had to pay full attention to everything that we were doing, it would be absolute chaos, and you wouldn't be able to do anything else. So we need that autopilot. But when we're talking about awareness of what's happening around us, I think for me, there has been this assumption that we are all fully aware. We are all awake. We're all, we can drive, we can have conversations. We're all fully aware of what's going on. And for me, I kind of put the fault, in inverted commas, at the feet of 𝗖𝗧𝗥𝗟. Not that I have anything, nasty about the guy. I'm sure he was a lovely guy. But he talked about, I think, therefore I am, is kind of his most famous saying, or his most famous philosophy. And for me, what's happened is that people in general have thought, well, I'm a human being. I think, therefore I am alive. Therefore I am aware. If I can think, then I'm automatically aware. Now, for me, the most important thing is that I do not agree or do not think that anybody is unaware. We hear this term a lot, people being unaware and all that kind of stuff. It's not that people are unaware, they just don't have the same approach to awareness that other people may have. Very similar to communication, like one person is a very outspoken when they're communicating, and that's how they think everybody else works. So everybody has a different approach to communication, to almost anything it is, and self-awareness is no different to that. So self-awareness is important, but autopilot is also important because it's a function that we do, but it gets us in trouble. I mean, I'm sure we've all had relationship issues, or well, let's stick with relationship issues, where you've been on autopilot where you've kind of gone, and I don't mean this as a men versus women thing, because I know men tend to be the kind of like, yeah, what, okay, but it can happen the other way around as well. That one person is on autopilot and just responding the way that they've always done, or they make assumptions. So what I want to be able to do is break that connection, or not break the connection, break the assumption that autopilot is needed for everything, and that we can get into that little gap. And let me talk about that gap. And the gap is what I call the micro gap. I think other people have referred to it as well. But my definition of self-awareness is the ability to notice this micro gap between a stimulus and response, recognize what's happening inside you, and reading the world around you inside that moment. So the stimulus could be somebody shouting at you, somebody just asking you a question, whatever it is. That's the stimulus. Now the response is something different. I don't put the response down to self-awareness. The response is your behaviors, your habits, whatever it is. That is a separate piece. I want to talk about what happens before that response kicks in. And that is what self-awareness is, for me, is the definition, is that micro gap. Now, what I'm going to talk about today is the kind of how we can spread that micro gap so that we can actually start to consciously make decisions, rather than being this unconscious autopilot, that we can turn into conscious decisions. And why it's being ignored, this is, for me, my definition, is that there are many skills within the L&D world, or within the work, that are, I'm going to call them easy in terms of L&D. I've just put two here as the two ones that came to mind for me: project management, communication. They are skills because they can be observed, they can be tracked. You can put compliance around them. You can put competencies around them. You can say somebody is going to be promoted or a pay rise because they can do that project management or communication better than another person, so you can compare them against each other. But self-awareness is this kind of fuzzy, kind of weird thing that nobody's ever really been able to map, or to say, to compare one to another, or to put a competency around it. But people get promoted because of it, because people are more aware and they seem more malleable and more better with other people. They get pay rises from it, they get demotions, or they get sacked because of it. But there is nothing to say what is it and what do we measure within it. So what I want to be able to do is start breaking those kind of barriers around these things, and say, no, we can say that self-awareness is in the same box as all these other skills. And I'm not going to talk about, what is the definition of a skill. I think, if you've seen the L&D Shakers threads on those, they're probably one of the longest threads. Is like, what is the difference between a competency and a skill, and all that kind of stuff. But for me, it's like a skill is something you can develop, you can improve upon, and it's something you can track, measure in some way, shape, or form. And self-awareness has always been outside of that, and I want to bring it into this realm. And so, why does it matter? Why? Well, how can it help? And for me, there's like an internal and an external look at this. For me, the internal, as in us as L&D people, and if you're not part of L&D, my apologies, but if you are in that side of coaching, mentoring, supporting, training, whatever it is, that if you are more aware of things, you can be a better X, and an X is a better presenter, a better listener, a better practitioner. To give you an example, you think like, you see on the slide, like the swaying presenter. It's like, what the hell? So I was practicing my presentation technique. I was part of a Toastmasters group for my old company. And if you don't know Toastmasters, great organization. If you want to improve your presentation skills, it's a really, really great way to do it. The way is you stand in front of a group and you present them, you tell a story, and then they give feedback to you, but on specific things. Everybody's got a job. Somebody is only looking at body language. Somebody's only looking at the words you use. Somebody's only looking at the tone. So you get this really kind of great view rather than somebody going, it's all right, in terms of feedback. So I was presenting, and one of my friends was on the side, and I can't really turn in the camera, but he was like by the side of me, and he said, I said, what's your feedback? And he went, you make me sick. And I was like, well, that's a bit harsh. But all right, well, what do you mean? And he's like, no, I physically am feeling sick because I'm doing this. I'm swaying. And to everybody in front, I'm doing this. And you can't really see too much. But to the side on, I'm like this. And he's like, oh, kind of thing. And I was like, no, I don't do that. And he's like, oh, yeah, you do. And then other people were going, yeah, actually, come to think of it, you do a lot of swaying. And it's because my energy, as you can probably tell, I'm a bit of a kind of, like to use my hands and all that kind of stuff. And so when I'm standing and presenting, I need my energy to go somewhere. So I used to rock, not like rock, but like I used to sway. And until then, I didn't realize I was doing it. But then after that, I was like, oh, okay, now I'm aware that I sway, rock. What do I do with that? And so I tried different things. I tried kind of like just standing on one spot. That didn't work because I looked like somebody about to explode. And so I would, move, and I practiced like how to move, how to use my hands. I still do a bit of rocking, but not so much. But because I'm now aware of that aspect, my message then becomes clearer to people because they're not focused on me swaying all over the place or me being weird with my hands or whatever it is. So if you're presenting and you want to give a message across, the last thing you want is, to get in the way of that message. So awareness for you is critical. I've also had, things like reading the room earlier. So if there's silence in the room, for those of us in L&D, there's many a time where you've kind of like either tried to land a joke or you kind of ask a question and there's crickets and and there's dead silence. And you're like, oh, okay, what's going on? But if you're aware of people's body language and people maybe shifting or whatever it is that they're doing, if you're more aware of what's happening, not just in you, but in your audience, not saying it's going to solve everything, but you may catch yourself think like, maybe I need to stop and go, hey, everybody, am I going too fast for this? Does this bit make sense? I sense there's something going on. And so you can adjust as you go because you're aware of what's going on rather than just a blinkered, I am going to present and that's my message and that's it. For the audience, it also helps when you're more aware of things. Now, I am sure most of you, if you're in L&D, have had somebody come up to you and say, I need to improve communication skills. My manager has told me I need to improve communication skills. What do I need to do? You're like, oh God. All right. And then you got 1,000 questions. What communication, how it is, what it is, and you try and help them. Or you might go read that book or take that course on communication, and then they'll come back and go, yeah, that didn't work. Or even worse, they don't even come back to you because they've watched something or read something like, yeah, that's not me, and carried on. But if somebody is more aware of themselves and what are their real strengths and challenges, not just what their manager says it is, then you have a much better accurate starting point in order to improve. the example in terms of improved communication is like, if I go onto ChatGPT and go, I need to improve communication, go. It will give me, kind of War and Peace on communication. But if I put in a much more accurate version of what I need, so like, hey, I am suffering. I need this bit about my. You can see some examples here, like I need examples or to help me when I'm under pressure in communication. I feel I get too nervous and I get defensive. Whatever it is, if you're more accurate in how you are or how you feel about a certain skill, then you've got a starting point to move onwards. One of the things I always say is like, how do you know where to go if you don't know what your starting point is? So you need to understand if you understand where you are, then your direction and where you're heading just becomes that much clearer.
So you mentioned like reading the room. How does it apply when you're teaching somebody virtually and like having people with like a sea of cameras off, for example? Like how does that apply?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that's it makes our job a hell of a lot harder. I mean, you can read into it. I mean, like, I'm not going to call anybody out here, but because it's a different environment. But if somebody's camera is off, then you are then aware. If you're aware that those cameras are off, then at least you can say something, or kind of like say, well, is there a reason your camera's off, or is it something I'm doing that's making people's cameras turn off? But then you can go into it 1,000 different ways and question yourself about maybe they're just going to get a cup of coffee or something. But it's a lot harder. It is harder, but the awareness is not just in the presentation and seeing their reaction to reading the room. When it comes to training, for me, awareness is all the steps. So the communication in the emails or instant message when they're joining the chat, any conversations, let's say a breakout room, are they, if they turn into a breakout room and then the camera turns on, are they participating? Is it that they don't know why they're here, and so that's why they're not embarrassed, maybe they're ashamed. I don't know what what emotions it is, but there are clues that are not just I'm in a presentation, the camera's off and I've got no input. It's about being. Let me go back one step. It's about the patterns, and that's what my kind of control model, which I'll show you later, is talking about. It's not about one-offs. It's about helping you see that we all have patterns that we stick to. So, for example, if say you and me are on you're presenting and I turn my camera off. If say I turn my camera off on every training session, but then I speak to their manager, or you speak to my manager, and your manager says, no, he keeps his camera on with team meetings and stuff. You're like, oh, okay, there's a pattern here that you don't turn your camera, you turn your camera off for training, but you keep it on for other things. Well, why is that? And that's all awareness is just understanding there is a pattern, and then thinking, well, what do I need to do to understand that pattern? There is no solution to it. It's not like, right, this is the magical thing. It's much more about understanding the being aware of that person is doing something and then changing their behavior, and then seeing what that pattern is. It probably doesn't answer your question. It's maybe what you were hoping for, but and to be honest, that's the same with even if you're in a classroom. I mean, you could be aware of what action's happening, but every action in its on its own doesn't mean anything, because we all have a bad day or whatever it is. But it's when you start putting the patterns together, and if we practice these awareness moments, then it's not just a one-off that we notice. It's like, hey, I noticed that XXXXXX. There seems to be a pattern here. Can we do something about what's going on? And then the recipient is like, oh, they've noticed that there is this pattern. Maybe I didn't know, with the swaying thing. Maybe I didn't know that there was I was turning my camera off every time. And then you've got a conversation.
That's great. Thank you.
No, no worries. So, and this is just an extension of what we're saying. There is always data coming in. There's always an input, silence, energy shifts, polite agreement, whatever it is. The key thing is, yes, there are moments, but it's not about jumping on them. It's about noticing the patterns and noticing to see, are they doing it regularly? I know, let's say you're presenting, you've done 4 sessions, and in every session there's a silence when you hope that there'll be questions. Then that pattern should then say, it's probably me, not them. And then you kind of think, okay, well, maybe I need to ask the audience or go back to your subject matter experts and figure out something different and stuff. But there's always input you can take. And one of the biggest problems is kind of this bit harks back. I did a talk with the LXD, the Learning Design Expo, I think last week it was, and we talked about impact. And one of the things I talked about was that when we are giving training, let's say I use the example of feedback training. You say, here's the model, coin model, whatever it is, and you spend a whole session going through the session and blah, blah, blah. This is how you do feedback. And then you run the role plays and everybody's being the tentative person and asking the right questions and using the model right. And and everybody's like, oh my God, this is such a great session. Thank you so much. And everybody leaves happy. And then the shit hits the fan, pardon my language. The proverbial hits the fan, should I say. And then, there's too much pressure, or the budgets miss, or whatever it is. There's always pressure. And I don't talk about stress. Stress is different. Stress is how you react to pressure. So I always talk about pressure rather than stress. So there's this stressful moments. And the trouble is that once you get into a stressful moment, you fall back into your old ways. So just because you know the model, like we're not robots, you're not like we can just go into a training, update, unless you ask Musk, he probably wants to do that, but we can't just update and be done with it. We are human beings that we take in the input, but then we have all this other proverbial shit that goes on. And then it gets lost because we've got habits and stuff. So what I talk about is digging in the sand. Now you think, oh, boy, where's he going with this? So imagine yourself on a beach. If you're in London, it's probably a pebble beach down in Brighton. But you're on a beach and you're digging away, and then you get a tiny bit down, but the sand keeps on coming back in. Now, I use that metaphor so that the whole is the skill, the feedback model, the project management, the communication skill, whatever it is, that's the thing you're putting in the hole. You're trying to kind of create this hole in somebody or your group, and you're trying to give them information, but the sand keeps on rushing back in. That's all their old behaviors and their beliefs and values and all that kind of stuff. That keeps on rushing back in. So what you need wet sand. So you need that tiny bit of wet, that it basically keeps it's not perfect. It's not going to keep those walls from caving in over time, but it gives you that gap, that little bit of gap that you can start putting things in. Now, to give you an example on this, I'm going to use, so let's say you've got a manager or a leader, and you're teaching them communication or leadership training, whatever it is, and they go out into the room and think, oh, okay, right, I've got to be more curious with my team. And then the proverbial happens. Somebody's misses a deadline, or the customer does, whatever it is. The 1,000 million reasons that people get stressed or pressure increases. And so what happens is the manager then reverts back to their dry sand moment. So they would, they get angry, they shout at the people, and then the circle continues. People just get upset. They don't say anything anymore because they think the manager's going to shout at them, etc., etc. But what the wet sand means is, so the trigger comes in, it's the same. oh my God, customers being an idiot, you've missed deadlines, whatever it is. But the manager now goes, oh, I'm angry. Okay. Now, am I angry at that person? Or am I angry because the customer changed the deadline and my managers give me a hard time because of X? Now, what you can do with that little gap is that the manager has realized, oh, I'm angry. Okay. So then your question can change. You can choose what your question is rather than act on autopilot, which we talked about at the start. You can choose your response now. So that manager could say, do you know what, Bob? I'm really angry because I've got so much, my manager is really pushing us to make that gap. So I don't mean to take it on you, but you know, I'm angry at the moment because of this. That changes the conversation. It changes the conversation into not I'm going to berate you and you're going to feel terrible, is, oh, we are on the same playing field. We're having a conversation now. Now I can then, as the employee, say, oh, yeah, okay, I appreciate that. I'm going to maybe try harder, or we can try this. So it starts becoming something you can actually deal with rather than everything falling apart. Now, you can train a manager, and I'm not talking about the training bit. You can train a manager of how to be curious and what questions to ask in their leadership. But what we don't do at the moment is train them to be aware of that moment. We don't train them in the workshops, at least most of the time we don't, of what happens when you get angry. What happens? Do you notice, like, are you on autopilot all the time when shit hits the fan? Or do you know, what I want you to do as you leave the classroom is to think, I want to just notice when you're getting angry. Notice your shifts in behavior. Just notice it. Don't do anything different, because it's baby steps. Notice what's going on. And that, what you've done, we talked about the kind of the micro gap, is you've spreaded it just a tiny bit. And that then gives you more time. So that wet sand has gone in. It gives you just that little bit more time. And then over time, that will then, in theory at least I hope, kind of grow and grow and grow and grow. So that's the kind of, you know, why we need it, and at least for me, why it's important. So what is it? You know, what have I been building? So control, or the control model is CTRL. So it's concealed, triggered, regulate, and lead. Not leader, not a person or a role, but to lead with self-awareness. Now, there's a couple of important caveats to be aware of with this. This is not a ladder. As you can see, this is a flat compass. This is not you start in concealed and you work your way up to lead. This is a state. So it's not a style. It's not DISC or insights or any of those kind of psychometric models that give you a label saying you are this, off you go for the rest of your life, and work on it. This is saying that you are all of these at any one point, and you have dominant and you have kind of secondary ones and stuff. So when you take the assessment, it will say you are in your dominant state is triggered, for example. But that doesn't mean to say you are a triggered person. It's not saying that the equivalent is somebody saying you are an extrovert. I mean, I've trained in DISC and insights and all that kind of stuff. It's such a wrong thing to say somebody is an introvert and extrovert, because I am a massive extrovert, but I have big introvert moments in my life, depending on my where I am and what I'm doing. And like my wife is a big introvert, but she has big extrovert moments. So it's not about kind of this is you. So this is saying that where your dominance is, but where you're potentially missing. So let me quickly go through them. Concealed, as you can see here, protection first, holds back until safe. So it's not, like I said right at the start, we're not talking about unaware people. This is somebody that they are aware of what they're doing, but they don't like to share it. So they come across as unaware, but they just don't feel safe enough to share their awareness. Now that could be because of problems in when they're growing up, or when the previous manager, whatever it is. But they are much more concealed. They hold on to their awareness tightly. A triggered person, it's kind of where I am, is give or take, is they are aware of what's happening, but it's usually kind of too late. I don't know if you've ever had that experience where like you go, oh, I wish I'd said this, or like, oh, they're actually quite angry. Yeah, you realize afterwards what's happened, and you kind of go, oh, I wish that was something I could have done in the past and stuff. So you're aware of things, but you're just not quite there. Regulated is you're more aware of what's going around, but it's like in English we say you got blinkers on, so you're focusing on yourself. I am aware of what's going on around me. I'm aware of like kind of my hands and what I'm doing, but kind of outside there's a gap. There's a bit of a kind of missing data, should we say. And then lead is you lead with awareness because everybody else looks like you are fully aware, because you focus much more on what's happening around you rather than. So you're much more, it's not like you're more aware than the other people. It's just, it looks like you're more aware because you are not an extrovert, but your awareness is outwards rather than inwards, and that causes issues as well. Were there questions, or was that because I kept on getting a little bleep and stuff, or was it just?
So far, no.
Okay, let me just check to see. How can I see if people are waiting to come in? No, I don't think. No, okay, we'll carry on. So yeah, so that's the model I created, and I wanted to give people this starting point to say self-awareness is not just this kind of random thing that some people have and some people don't. I wanted to, again, it's not a label, but I wanted to give people a direction to say, well, this is where my starting point is, and this is where my direction. So what the control model does is it not just says this is your dominant state, but it will say out with the data coming in, it will say it looks like you're heading in this direction. So for example, your report would say you're regulated stroke triggered, which would mean that you are dominantly in the regulated area, but you have moments where you're more into the triggered area. And so that's, again, not a good thing or a bad thing. It's just that's the state that you're in. And there are some gaps, maybe your concealed area, again, that can come across as like, oh, I don't want to be concealed. But actually, that's a good thing, to keep under your own awareness safe is a healthy thing at some points. Same as with Leo. It's great that somebody can have the awareness looking outwards, but then you're not looking inwards. So you're not looking after yourself as much as you probably should do. So the control model is a mirror, not a life sentence. So it's not a state to say, this is who you are and that's it. It's a journey that you go on. So you're not in one state forever. You move depending on the pressure on safety and confidence, context, etc., etc., etc. And what I've tried to do in the assessment is I've tried to recreate some of those different pressure moments, so that when you are answering them, obviously it's still sterile because it's still an assessment, but I tried as much as I can to create what may feel like a stressed environment, so that you can start to answer in a bit more realistic way. And the most important question, like we said, in terms of that manager being stressed, is what shows up when you're under pressure. That's for me the most important thing. And yes, you can take the control model and kind of get the report, but it's something you can do in your training. You know, you can, and like I said last week when I trained in the design week, that's one of the first things that any trainer can do around self-awareness is talk about what pressure looks like for the individual. You can, you could do, say, I know, let's say a one-day workshop on feedback, on the feedback model, and you could spend an hour talking about what does the pressure look like for each individual, what shows up when they don't have the time to do a proper feedback loop with somebody, or they get the wrong feedback, or they get feedback they didn't like. Is what makes them feel that way? And we tend to kind of ignore that bit and just carry on the model, but we need to include that bit. Absolutely. And then I mean, one thing I didn't cover, because that maybe that's for another session, is that research has said that for the vast majority of us feel that we are fully aware, like we're almost in that kind of lead stroke regulated area. But in actual fact, like if we really ask ourselves, it's called the confidence cloud, because like we think we're confident that we're self-aware, but actually, if you ask others and stuff, it's we're not quite there yet, which is why I in the model I built in this what I call the 180. So you take your assessment, then you give it to somebody you trust, and you get a combined awareness, and it gives a much more honest feel. But yeah, it's like with anything that we do with NND, there's no perfect rhyme or reason for it. So
my question is, as you made this CTRL framework, have you already published it and sort of used it with some folks, or is it still under research? Like, I'm very keen to know what the response has been when you have administered this to people.
Yeah, so it's alive, and it's a full business. You can buy it and all that kind of stuff. I'm still tweaking it and still improving it, but officially it's live. For the last year, I've been building and testing and stuff. So I had a group of probably about 20 core people that like kind of gave me feedback, and the way it starts and the way it is now is completely different, as but the feedback I've got so far is there is still a lot of little nicks and little kind of things that when you're in your bubble, you overlook the small things and you just think big picture. So I'm still tweaking a lot of things, but one of the most overriding things that I've got out of it from people's response is that it's a great conversation starter with themselves. That it's just a great mirror for them, because I don't want it to be a you are this is what you're like, this is what you do, this is who you are. I want it to be as well. The data says you're going this way, you're thinking about this, and maybe there is a blind spot here. And the biggest thing that I got is people saying they thought they had awareness until they did the 180, and their whether it be their wife, their partner, their husband, whoever, trusted person, answers with them, and they're like, what they thought their awareness was and what their partner was, that combined one is different. And they're like, "Ooh, I didn't realize that I was, there's a gap." And what the report does is it tells you it, because I want to keep it psychologically safe and stuff. So it doesn't say you are here and your partner says you're here, because that's not very safe. What it does is it gives you a combined one to say, combined, this is where your data's saying. You can see your original one, so you can kind of see where things are going. And most of the feedback has been around that kind of realization to say, "Oh, this is interesting." Now, I think sort of where you're maybe going in terms of like academia, I haven't gone there yet. I've spoken to a couple of psychologists, like kind of chartered psychologists, and they've looked at it and went like, kind of, this is very, very interesting. And I'm looking at like maybe getting some students that are studying around psychology and kind of helping them to maybe do I know there's a lot of tests you can do to say if it's relevant and that kind of thing. So that's kind of something that's I'd love to do, but it takes pardon my French, a fuckload of time to do. So it's something I'm working on it.
Super. And just to follow up, like,
Yep.
who's the target user of this? Like, who's the ideal person that you'd like to
Well, the ideal
administer?
person,
Like, is it facilitators? Is it like, could it be anybody, or is
technically
it
it's
targeted to a certain?
because it's awareness. I've aimed it at coaches, and in particular first-time coaches or first-time wannabe coaches, because I mean I've done the the ICF training and stuff, and I know that one of the hardest bits when you're first starting a client conversation is how do I get to the deep understanding questions as quickly as and effective as possible. So the whole idea is that the client can take this assessment. The coach gets a coach report to say, these are some of the things that came up. These are some questions that you can ask based on the report. And so you've got a prompt. It's not to say this is how to coach them, because that would be wrong. This is more of these are some questions you could ask, to add to your plethora of questions. And so that's the main audience. I think for me, the second audience is L&D, to understand yourself and understand how you present, maybe mentoring, that kind of thing. But a lot of people have said this would be a really good basis of like a team environment. Like if you've got a team that needs to understand each other better and where they interact with each other, almost like a DISC workshop or an insights workshop, it would be kind of a control workshop. So there are a couple of different avenues I'm looking at, but coaches is my primary one.
Yeah, just wanted to thank you. The presentation was great, and I think everyone enjoyed it. So, and you all, thanks for joining. That was a pleasure. Also for hosting like the first immersive series event in a long time. So that was a good reboot.